isn't available. Okay, we're still live. Oh, wow. All right. So it looks like YouTube just restarted. So I got to do the intro again. What's up, YouTube? My name is Michael Music. I'm reading this book, Think and Grow Rich, and yeah, we're gonna be continuing on the chapter of desire. So, like I said, I'm doing a deep dive into each chapter because like everyone reads this book. I noticed a lot of people read the book and they're like, oh yeah, it's a cool book. Like, what do you mean it's a cool book? Like, this stuff is gold, right? Like, this is essentially, I think, the playbook to obtaining anything that you want in life, right? And I know that's a bold statement to make, but it really is. And Napoleon Hill spent 20 years of his life just really without any compensation whatsoever, coming up with this philosophy. And so it definitely makes sense to take a look into it. And yeah, I guess I'll start the episode introducing myself. My name is Michael Music. I just graduated college from Penn State. I got a degree in mechanical engineering. And the reason I did was because I thought engineers would get rich. Wasn't the case, right? But I started my journey in entrepreneurship and sales when I was 19 years old. I started a painting business, and I actually failed with that painting business. And it was at that moment when I failed my first business endeavor that I really got hit back, fell into like this like 2 week like rut because I remember I had a goal to earn $10,000 that summer, and I was like, "Oh my god, I just lost my vehicle to reaching this goal," right? So I was in a 2 week rut, and that's when I truly was like, "Okay, like it's time to get back on my feet." I actually realized like what it meant to find your other self, and that's something I'll dive into the book. But I realized that before everything went to crap, I had a really negative mindset, and I was actually almost like expecting to fail in this first business. And what do you know? What did I do? I failed. And so I started diving deep into reading all these books. I've read personally over 100 books on success, and I realized after reading 100 books, what I learned was I was still not rich, right? Like, you're 22 years old. I've read 100 books under my belt. And I'm not saying I read them all cover to cover. I've definitely picked up some books where I just read a chapter of them, but I never really got rich. So what I decided to do was, okay, let me go back to the basics. I started picking up this book when I was 19 years old and just absolutely deep dove into it. And I didn't get rich after reading it the first time either. So what am I doing now? I'm gonna read it over and over to really like actually apply these principles and and be a living testimony that this book can bring you riches, right? Like, who knows? Like, I'm only 22 right now. I definitely will admit I'm not a millionaire, but I hope this serves as a testimony, especially in the future, for like, okay, this book really does work. Like, this kid, Michael Music, studied this book and it really does work. So yeah, that's the intro. I'm gonna get right into reading, and as usual, what I'll do is I'll read, pause, and any questions that come up, any thoughts, ideas that come up, I would love to share with you. So I'm on page 34 of the deluxe version. I know there's different versions out there, but I'm going to read this one last line that we read yesterday that we ended it off on. So Napoleon Hill says, remember too that all who succeed in life get off to a bad start and pass through many heartbreaking struggles before they arrive. The turning point in the lives of those who succeed usually comes at the moment of some crisis through which they are introduced to their other selves. Okay, that's actually very interesting. That's the first paragraph, because the story that I introduced this whole video with was me explaining how I really went through a rut, and it was through my first big failure of really trying to make things for myself and not just following the masses, which is where I found the other self. And he doesn't explain it here, but the other self is the self that actually believes in the goal that you set out, right? Like, a lot of people, Their habitual way of thinking is so negative and so in disbelief and so absorbed in what the masses think that they never will step out on their own. And that's their old self, right? Obviously, I've been there. I'm sure you have too, right? And so the other self is like, okay, like what's the other flip side of the coin of negative thinking, right? It's the positive thinking, it's the faith, it's the applying these principles. So that's why I resonate so well with this book because it was that first major failure when I was 19 years old, starting out going door to door, just to build a painting business from the ground up. That really that really put me into okay, like now I understand that what I did was wrong and I failed, but it's time to now get better. So very interesting first paragraph to start us off. Furthermore, John Bunyan wrote The Pilgrim's Progress, which is among the finest of all English literature, after he had been confined in prison and sorely punished because of his views on the subject of religion. O. Henry discovered the genius which slept within his brain after he had met with great misfortune and was confined in a prison cell in Columbus, Ohio. Being forced through misfortune to become acquainted with his other self and to use his imagination, he discovered himself to be a great author instead of a miserable criminal and outcast. Strange and varied are the ways of life, and stranger still are the ways of infinite intelligence, through which men are sometimes forced to undergo all sorts of punishment before discovering their own brains and their own capacity to create useful ideas through imagination. Wow, that's an incredible story. So it's another example of someone who found the other side, the flip side of the coin. And what does he mean when he says, and stranger still are the ways of infinite intelligence through which men are sometimes forced to go all sorts of punishment before discovering their own brains and their own capacity to create useful ideas through imagination. Right? It's interesting to think that all these men they go through this like really big downfall before they finally truly do excel. Edison, the world's greatest inventor and scientist, was a tramp telegraph operator. He failed innumerable times before he was driven finally to the discovery of the genius which slept in within his brain. Charles Dickens began by pasting labels on blacking pots. The tragedy of his first love penetrated the depths of his soul and converted him into one of the world's truly great authors. The tragedy produced first David Copperfield, then a succession of other works that made this a richer and better world for all who read his books. Disappointment over other Disappointment over love affairs generally has the effect of driving men to drink and women to ruin, and this because most people never learn the art of transmuting their strongest emotions into dreams of a constructive nature. Helen Keller became deaf and blind shortly after birth. Despite her greatest misfortune, she had written her name indelibly in the pages of the history of the great. Her entire life has served as evidence that no one ever is defeated until defeat has been accepted as a reality. That's kind of like that saying, quitters never win and winners never quit, right? You're not truly defeated until you accept defeat as reality. What does that mean to you? Robert Burns was an illiterate country lad. He was cursed by poverty and grew up to be a drunkard in the bargain. The world was made better for his having lived because he clothed beautiful thoughts in poetry and thereby plucked a thorn and planted a rose in its place. Booker T. Washington was born in slavery, handicapped by race and color, because he was tolerant had an open mind at all times, on all subjects, and was a dreamer, he left his impress for good on an entire race. Beethoven was deaf, Milton was blind, but their names will last as long as time endures because they dreamed and translated their dreams into organized thought. Before passing to the next chapter, kindle anew in your mind the fire of hope, faith, courage, and tolerance. If you have these states of mind and a working knowledge on the principles described, all else that you need will come to you when you are ready for it. Okay, let me talk about this because once again, the three special words that I truly have found in this book that mean a lot to me are state of mind, right? So what is a state of mind? He's saying kindle anew in your mind the fire of hope, faith, courage, and tolerance. So, we got these words hope, faith, courage, and tolerance. What are those words essentially, right? If you have these states of mind, so what is he saying there? Like hope, faith, courage, and tolerance. At the end of the day, they all represent different states of mind, right? They're all different words, and each word has like a different I guess I gotta say a different vibration to it, right? A different ring to the word. And there's a state of mind known as hope, a state of mind known as faith, courage, and tolerance, right? So he's really emphasizing the state of mind. And I just know the only reason I bring this up is because I noticed it comes up in every chapter essentially throughout this book. Okay. So if you have these states of mind and the working knowledge of the principles described, all else that you need will come to you when you are ready for it. That's interesting. So my mentor used to say that what's most important is your state of mind, and then your story and the strategy is the third. So most people focus on the how. It's called the tyranny of how. But really, what's so important is that state of mind that you hold. The how will come, especially when you're ready for it. When you take action on it, you will be able to improvise yourself. So let Emerson state the thought in these words. Every proverb, every book, every byword that belongs to thee for aid and comfort shall surely come home through open or winding passages. Every friend, whom not thy fantastic will, but the great and tender soul in thee craveth, shall lock thee in his embrace. Okay, what did that sentence mean? Truly, that was a very interesting language. I'm going to pass over it for sake of time. I truly, I got to be honest, I didn't understand that sentence. There is a difference between which. Okay, this is. I really want you to listen closely to what I'm about to say right next. Right, this is on page 36 of the deluxe version, and Napoleon Hill says there is a difference between wishing for a thing and being ready to receive it. No one is ready for a thing until he believes he can acquire it. The state of mind must be belief, not mere hope or wish. Open mindedness is essential for belief. Closed minds do not inspire faith, courage, and belief. Remember, no more effort is required to aim high in life, to demand abundance and prosperity than is required to accept misery or poverty, or misery and poverty. A great poet, okay, and then he gets into the poetry. So let me pause there, right? Like this is one of those quotes that Bob Proctor will go over, and I remember it's the most interesting paragraph ever. There's a difference between wishing for a thing and being ready to receive it. What is that difference? Like you wish for stuff. Like we all wish. I have my wishes, but what is the difference between me wishing for something and me truly being ready to receive it? No one is ready for a thing until he believes he can acquire it. So what does that mean to truly believe in every cell of your body that you can acquire it? The state of mind must be belief, not mere hope or wish. So going back, we talked about different states of mind. There's a state of mind known as hope, state of mind of wishing. There's different levels to it, right? And then there's a state of mind of full absolute belief. So what is the difference between those three states of mind, and how important is the state of mind known as belief? Open-mindedness is essential for belief. Closed minds do not inspire faith, courage, and belief. So very interesting paragraph. And then he says, remember, no more effort is required to aim high in life, to demand abundance and prosperity than is required to accept misery and poverty. Now, what's he mean by that, right? Because everyone thinks like, oh, if you want to be rich, you gotta work extremely hard, right? But we're talking about aiming high in life, right? So at the end of the day, think about like a sniper, right? Does it take him more effort to shoot a bullet up in the air, up in the sky high, or shoot it down at the ground, right? All it is where he's aiming, right? So what does he mean when he says no more effort is required to aim high in life, to demand abundance and prosperity, which is way up here, than is required to accept misery and poverty? At the end of the day, they require the same amount of energy. Just where are you aiming at in life? A great poet has correctly stated this universal truth through these lines. I bargained with life for a penny, and life would pay no more. However, I begged that evening when I counted my scanty store. For life is just an employer, he gives you what you ask, but once you have set the wages, why you must bear the task. I worked for a menial's hire, only to learn dismayed that any wage I had asked of life, life would have willingly paid. What's that poem mean, right? What's that poem essentially saying, right? It's saying like whatever you ask, he'll give you what you ask, but once you set the wages, you must bear the task, right? So if you shoot high in the sky for some really up there dream, you must bear the task of doing the work to get the dream. But life will give you it just as much as if you ask for a penny, because you really don't have to do much for a penny. So you'll do the work to get that penny, which is minimal work. I'd much rather do an abundance of work to get the abundance of my dream than to do minimal work to get a minimal amount of, let's say, a penny. Okay, now we're on the section where Napoleon Hill says, desire outwits Mother Nature. As a fitting climax to this chapter, I will introduce one of the most unusual persons I have ever known. I first saw him 24 years ago, a few minutes after he was born. He came into the world without any physical sign of ears, and the doctor admitted, when pressed for an opinion, that the child might be deaf and mute for life. I challenged the doctor's opinion. I had the right to do so. I was the child's father. I too reached a decision and rendered an opinion, but I expressed the opinion silently in the secrecy of my own heart. I decided that my son would hear and speak. Nature could send me a child without ears, but nature could not induce me to accept the reality of the affliction. So, this is Napoleon Hill's own experience that he's explaining right now about how desire outwits Mother Nature. In my own mind, I knew that my son would hear and speak. How? I was sure there must be a way. I knew I would find it. I thought of the words of the immortal Emerson. The whole course of things goes to teach us faith. We need only obey. There is guidance for each of us, and by lowly listening, we shall hear the right word. The right word, Napoleon Hill says, desire. More than anything else, I desired that my son should not be a deaf mute. From that desire, I never receded, not for a second. So, what does he mean when he says the right word, right? And so, for me, the right word that I've been really picking up in these pages of the book, and each one of these chapters, is state of mind. And is it fair to say that desire is a state of mind, right? It does consume every portion, every cell in your body, but is that fair to say that it's a state of mind? So I like how he says, by lowly listening, we shall hear the right word. Many years previously, I had written, our only limitations are those we set up in our own minds. For the first time, I wondered if that statement was true. Lying on the bed in front of me was a newborn child without the natural equipment of hearing. Even though he might hear and speak, he was obviously disfigured for life. Surely this was a limitation which that child had not set up in his own mind. What could I do about it? Somehow I would find a way to transplant into that child's mind my own burning desires for ways and means of conveying sound to his brain without the aid of ears. As soon as the child was old enough to cooperate, I would fill his mind so completely with a burning desire to hear that nature would, by methods of her own, translate it into physical reality. All this thinking took place in my own mind, but I spoke of it to no one. Every day, I renewed the pledge I had made to myself not to accept a deaf mute for a son. As he grew older and began to take notice of things around him, we observed that he had a slight degree of hearing. When he reached the age when children usually began talking, he made no attempt to speak, but we could tell by his actions that he could hear certain sounds slightly. That was all I needed to know. I was convinced that if he could ever hear, even slightly, he might develop still greater hearing capacity. Then something happened which gave me hope. It came from an unexpected source. We bought we bought a Victrola. When the child heard the music for the first time, he went into ecstasies and promptly appropriated the machine. He soon showed a preference for certain records. Among them, It's a Long Way to Tipperary. On one occasion, he played that piece over and over for almost 2 hours, standing in front of the Victrola, with his teeth clamped on the edge of the case. The significance of this self formed habit of his did not become clear to us until years afterward, for we had never heard of the principle of bone conduction of sound at the time. Shortly after he appropriated the Victrola, I discovered that he could hear me quite clearly when I spoke with my lips touching his mastoid bone, or at the base of the brain. These discoveries placed in my possession the necessary media by which I began to translate into reality my burning desire to help my son develop hearing and speech. By the time he was making stabs at speaking certain words, the outlook was far from encouraging. But desire, backed by faith, knows no such thing as impossible. Having determined that he could hear the sound of my voice plainly, I began immediately to transfer to his mind the desire to hear and speak. I soon discovered that the child enjoyed bedtime stories. So I went to work creating stories designed to develop in him self-reliance, imagination, and a keen desire to hear and be normal. Having determined that I could hear the sound of my voice plainly, I began immediately to transfer to his mind the desire to hear and speak. I soon discovered that the child enjoyed bedtime stories. Oh wait, I just read that again. Okay, continuing on. Last paragraph, page 39. There was one story in particular which I emphasized by giving it some new and dramatic coloring each time it was told. It was designed to plant in his mind the thought that his affliction was not a liability, but an asset of great value. Despite the fact that all the philosophy I had examined clearly indicated that every adversity brings with it the seed of an equivalent advantage, I must confess that I had not the slightest idea how this affliction could ever become an asset. Let's see. Wow. Okay, so we got 10 pages to go. I'm going to finish up these 2 pages right now. Just him talking about his son. And tomorrow I'm going to wrap up the chapter on desire. I must confess that I had not the slightest idea how this affliction could ever become an asset. However, I continued my practice of wrapping that philosophy in bedtime stories, hoping the time would come when he would find some plan by which his handicap could be made to serve some useful purpose. Reason told me plainly that there was no adequate compensation for the lack of ears. In natural hearing equipment, despite being backed by faith, pushed reason aside and inspired me to carry on. Oh wait, my bad. He said desire, backed by faith, pushed reason aside and inspired me to carry on. What does that mean? Desired, backed by faith, pushed reason aside, right? There's obviously logic and reason, but I want you to ask yourself, like, is this logic and reason true? And then let me ask you, is it always true? Right? There's been plenty of times where logical, like back in the 1800s, oh, it's impossible to fly. There's been no airplanes ever invented. Was that true? Maybe. Was it really true? No, because the Wright brothers actually proved that absolutely is possible. As I analyze the experience in retrospect, I can see now that my son's faith in me had much to do with the astounding results. He did not question he did not question anything I told him. I sold him the idea that he had a distinct advantage over his older brother, and that this advantage would reflect itself in many ways. For example, the teachers in school would observe that he had no ears, and because of this, they would show him special attention and treat him with extraordinary kindness. They always did this. His mother saw to that by visiting the teachers and arranging with them to give the child the extra attention necessary. I sold him the idea too that when he became old enough to sell newspapers, his older brother, in parentheses, his older brother had already become a newspaper merchant. He would have a big advantage over his brother for the reason that people would pay him extra money for his wares because they could see that he was a bright, industrious boy, despite the fact that he had no ears. Okay, that's the end of the sentence. We could notice that gradually the child's hearing was improving. Moreover, he had not the slightest tendency to be self conscious because of his affliction. When he was about 7, he showed the first evidence that our method of service in his mind was bearing fruit. For several months, he begged for the privilege of selling newspapers, but his mother would not give her consent. She was afraid that his deafness made it unsafe for him to go on the street alone. Finally, he took matters into his own hands. One afternoon, when he was left alone with the servants, he ground and set out on his own. He borrowed 6 cents in capital from the neighborhood shoemaker, invested it in papers, sold out, reinvested it, and kept repeating until late in the evening. After balancing his accounts and paying back the profit of 42 or in paying back the 6 cents he borrowed from his banker, he had a net profit of 42 cents. When he got home that night, he found when he got home that night, we found him in a bed asleep with the money tightly clenched in his hand. His mother opened his hand, removed the coins, and cried, of all things. Crying over her son's first victory seemed so inappropriate. My reaction was the reverse. I laughed heartily, for I knew that my endeavor to plant in the child's mind an attitude of faith in himself had been successful. His mother saw in his first business venture a little deaf boy who had gone out in the streets and risked his life to earn money. However, I saw a brave, ambitious, self reliant little businessman whose stock in himself had been increased 100% because he had gone into business on his own initiative and had won. The transaction pleased me because I knew that he had given evidence of a trait of resourcefulness that would go with him all through life. All right, so we're going to pause there. So yeah, like I said, we're reading the story of True Desire, right? Like this kid had his ears. He was born without ears, and he's really making a name for himself. And it's when I read this the other morning, I truly was like, oh my god, it never hit me the way it did. What desire really feels like and what it can do for you. And I absolutely love this story. So with that being said, I'd love to ask you, like, what did you learn? What do you like from this talk? What is what's the new perspective you have, right? Like, what does it mean now? Like, you probably have ears. You probably were born with ears. So if a child is going on his own initiative, applying these principles of desire, what does that mean to you, who has such a bigger advantage? The fact that you can hear, speak, right? Like, there's something for everyone, and I love the idea that every seed comes with it. Every failure comes with it the seed of equivalent success, right? It's not the full success, it's the seed of an equivalent success. And what happens when you plant a seed for a tree, right? It takes time. There's actually a law called the law of gestation, which states like everything has an incubation period. For human babies, it's around 9 months, right? So the seed, it won't come to fruit right away, but it will come once you plant that seed or once you experience that failure. So I'm starting to really see the importance of that statement. And yeah, I really love these stories. So that's that. All right. I wanna thank you all for watching. Thank you, Facebook. Thank you, YouTube. Thank you, everyone that's watching the recording right now. And I'll end you off with this until we meet again in time and space. Bye for now. All right. Peace out, YouTube. I'll see you guys in the next event.